I was about to turn off the computer when my phone lit up with a notification. It was a message from Grace, my best friend. She wrote, "Sarah, you need to see this. I wasn't sure if I should send it, but you need to know." My heart raced, and a strange feeling washed over me. There was a video attached, only 29 seconds long. I pressed play, and what I saw froze me. It was my daughter, Susan. She was sitting on a couch at a fancy bar, holding a glass of whiskey, looking so grown up, so carefree. Beside her was Mary, my cousin. Susan laughed and, with a look of disdain, said, "My mom is a joke." And then she began to talk about me in such a cruel, bitter way. She's never achieved anything in life. A failure who works like crazy for a mediocre salary. It's pathetic. Those words echoed in my head. I sacrificed everything for her. I worked non-stop, took extra shifts, stayed up late, just to make sure she had a better life than I did. When Grace's voice, my friend, was heard in the background saying, "Susan, she's your mom. Are you hearing what you're saying?" Susan's response was even crueler. "So what? She acts like a saint, but she's just a frustrated woman killing herself for nothing." The video ended, but I stood there, phone in hand, her words still pounding in my mind. Failure. Pathetic. I knew my daughter had always been difficult, but I never imagined she'd be so ungrateful. I didn't respond to Grace. I didn't know what to say. I just put the phone down and went to the bathroom, leaning on the sink, trying to hold it together. Everything I did, everything I sacrificed for her. And instead of seeing me with gratitude, she saw me as a burden, something she was ashamed of. What hurt the most was that no matter how hard I worked, how much I sacrificed, she never appreciated it. To her, I was a failure. But deep down, I knew this situation had to change. I was tired of giving everything without getting anything in return. She needed to understand the reality. I could have shouted, could have called her and said everything I thought, but no. That would have been too easy. She needed to learn a lesson, and I was going to teach it in my way. Not with anger, but with action. I knew this moment was coming. The next week, she would have the final surprise. I woke up early, as usual, and made breakfast. She was still asleep, as usual, too late. When she finally got out of bed, still wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatshorts, she went straight to the fridge. "Hey," she said, yawning. "Good morning." "Good afternoon," I replied calmly, while cleaning the cup in the sink. She, as always, didn't notice what was going on. She grabbed the orange juice and helped herself. "I need your card later," she said casually, not even looking at me. "My card? What do you need now?" I asked, keeping my calm. "Oh, there's a sale at that sneaker store. I saw a model I want." "No." She looked at me, confused. "What?" I stared at her, unhurried. I said no. "I'm not paying for anything for you anymore, Susan. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever again." She stood there, frozen, shocked. "You're kidding, right? Do I look like I'm kidding?" She tried to play it off, laughing awkwardly, but I continued. "No. Enough. I spent the last 20 years of my life breaking my back, working non-stop, doing everything for you. And what do I get in return? My daughter calling me a failure, humiliating me in front of others. This won't continue." She went silent. Her eyes narrowed, and she started to justify herself. "Mom, you're taking this too seriously. It was just a vent." "A vent? You called me a failure, said you're ashamed of me. Is that a vent?" She tried to explain herself, but I was already decided. "I took care of you, but you're not a child anymore. You're going to learn to stand on your own, Susan." And with that, I handed her a list of jobs and apartments. "You have 30 days to find a job and a place to live. Now you're an adult. Time to act like one." The silence that followed was heavy. She stood there, not knowing what to do. She tried to rebel, said she had no money, didn't know how she would survive, but I didn't change my mind. In the following days, Susan tried to find a job, but failed. All her plans and expectations of an easy life were shattered when she found herself alone, without the safety nets I always provided her. She had never faced the reality of hard work, and now she was realizing what it was like to live without support. Finally, on the 15th day, she came into my room, her eyes red from crying. She was different, no longer carrying the arrogance from before. "Mom, I get it now," she said, her voice choked. "I acted like I was better than you because I went to college, because my friends have a different life. But I never saw how much you suffered to give us everything. I never understood what you went through." I listened to her in silence, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. She was finally seeing reality. I was selfish. I didn't know how much you fought. And now, I see. I'm completely lost. "Now you understand," I said. "The world isn't easy, Susan. I protected you too much, and that was a mistake. You need to understand the responsibility of life." She looked at me, her eyes full of regret. "Mom, can I start over? I want to change. I swear I do." I hugged her, squeezing her hand. "If you're willing, we can start over. Real change comes from within." The next morning, something was different. For the first time, Susan woke up before noon. She was no longer the spoiled girl from before. She was a young woman who was finally starting to understand the weight of real life. The lesson had been hard, but necessary. And as painful as it was, I knew she was finally ready to grow. She didn't immediately grab the imported coffee and the expensive cereals she always demanded. Instead, she hesitated and grabbed some bread. She started making toast. A simple, cheap meal. Something she would never have chosen before. She was starting to realize the value of things. "Good morning," I greeted, sipping my coffee. "Good morning," she murmured, sitting down at the table. She didn't have her phone in hand. She wasn't scrolling through her social media feed, watching influencers show off their extravagant lives. She was just present. I let the silence settle before asking, "What's the plan for today?" She exhaled slowly. "I have an interview." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" She nodded, pushing the toast around the plate. "It's at that restaurant here on the corner. It's just to be a waitress, but..." She stopped, as if afraid to admit it. "But it's a start," I finished for her. She nodded. I smiled slightly. "All right. Then tell me how it went when you get back." 3 days later, she got the job. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay well. But it was hers. I knew this when I saw her dragging herself into the house after her first shift. "Oh my God!" She groaned, falling onto the sofa and ripping off her shoes. I smiled. "Tough day." She gave me a tired look. "My feet feel like they've been trampled by a herd of elephants. And the customers, they're the worst. One guy broke the glass on my tray and..." She kept complaining. But, for the first time, she didn't sound like someone who wanted to run away from responsibility. She sounded like someone who was finally getting it. "Ah," my mom murmured, taking her coffee. "So working hard for little appreciation is frustrating." I shut my mouth, feeling my lips press together. "Now imagine doing that for 20 years, she finished. My face softened. "Mom, I'm proud of you." She smiled slightly and set the cup down on the table. "Was it really exhausting?" "This is the first real thing I've done for myself. And, for the first time, I understand how your life was. I used to think you were obsessed with work. That you didn't have a life outside of it." I paused and sighed. "But now I get it. You didn't have a choice." She nodded. "No, I didn't, Susan. And neither will you, if you want a real life." I leaned back on the couch. For the first time, I didn't argue. A week later, the real shock of reality came. Susan was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the list of apartments I had given her weeks earlier. But this time, she was holding a pen and a calculator, really doing the math. "I don't think I can afford any of this," she admitted, looking at me. "Even with this job, I'd barely be able to pay rent. There'd be nothing left for food or bills." She crossed her arms. "This is reality, Susan," I said bluntly. "That's why people work 2 jobs, do overtime, and sacrifice luxuries. You can't have everything handed to you and expect to live comfortably." I closed my eyes, feeling a slight headache. "I don't want to live like this forever." "Then do something about it," I said simply. Susan looked at me and said, "Like what?" I leaned on the counter and looked at her firmly. "You have a degree, Susan. A good degree. But you're sitting here waiting for the perfect job to fall into your lap. It doesn't work like that. You need to start at the bottom, like everyone else." I swallowed hard, looking at the table. I think I was just scared. Scared of what? I took a deep breath. "Of failing," I admitted, my voice almost a whisper. "I didn't want to start at the bottom. I thought, I don't know, I was too good for it." There it was. The pride and arrogance she carried for years were finally admitted out loud. My mom approached and placed her hand on mine. "No one is too good to work, Susan. No one. You can keep complaining, or you can start building a real life. The choice is yours." This time, I nodded. And for the first time, I truly meant it. 2 days later, I went to her with a new plan. "Mom, I applied for a position at an advertising agency," I said hesitantly. "It's not my dream job, but it's an entry-level position. If I get it, I can start saving to move out." She smiled. "Finally. That's a great start." I nodded and took a deep breath before continuing. "And I want to start paying rent. Even if it's a little." I blinked, surprised. That was unexpected. "I don't want to live off of you anymore, Mom." For the first time in years, I saw pride in her eyes. She wasn't looking at me like the spoiled girl who thought the world owed her everything. She was seeing me as a woman who was finally growing up. "Okay. Let's start small. You contribute, and we'll see how things go." I nodded quickly, determined. Finally, she was ready to change. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me." I held her hand. "I almost gave up," I admitted. "But I wanted you to wake up first." She swallowed hard, understanding exactly what I meant. For the first time since childhood, she hugged me. In the first 3 months after Susan started working at the restaurant, everything changed. She woke up early. She paid her own bills. She cooked her own meals instead of ordering food on my card. And most impressively, she started saving money to pay for a place to live. Not because I demanded it, but because she wanted to. She was changing. And for the first time in years, I felt hope. On a quiet Sunday evening, I was setting the table when Susan entered the kitchen holding 2 plates. "I made dinner," she said awkwardly. I looked at the food, baked fish and vegetables. Simple. Nothing fancy. But she had never cooked a full meal before. "You cooked?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She chuckled lightly. "I thought, after eating your free food for 26 years, it was time to give back." I smiled, grabbing the utensils. "Well, let's see if you inherited my cooking skills." We sat down together. For the first time in a long time, dinner wasn't tense. No arguments, no grudges, no wounded pride. Just a mother and a daughter sharing a meal. In the middle of dinner, Susan cleared her throat. "I have good news." "Oh yeah." I propped my elbows on the table, curious. She fiddled with the hem of her shirt, nervous. "I got the job at the advertising agency." Blinking, I was momentarily speechless. Then, a genuine smile spread across my face. "Susan, that's amazing." She let out a relieved sigh. It's not my dream job, it's a junior position, and the salary isn't much. But it's a start. And it's something I really want to do. In her eyes, I saw something different. The ambition that had been buried under years of immaturity finally surfacing again. I'm proud of you, I said, feeling every word. Her lips curved into a shy smile before she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I want to give you this, she said, sliding the envelope across the table. I hesitated before taking it. Inside, there was a substantial amount of money. $100 bills. What is this? I asked, furrowing my brow. She shifted in her seat. My first rent payment. I know it's not much, but I want to contribute. I don't want to take you for granted anymore, Mom. I looked at the money, feeling my heart tighten. It wasn't about the rent. It was about her showing gratitude, proving that she had changed. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked at her. You have no idea how much this means to me. She nodded. I think I do. I smiled, sliding the money back to her. Keep it up. But I thought you wanted me to help. I wanted you to grow, Susan. I wanted you to learn responsibility. And you've learned. She looked at me, confused. So, what should I? Use it to invest in your future, I said calmly. Open a savings account, save for your first apartment, do something that will help you move forward. She blinked a few times, absorbing it. Then, a slow smile appeared on her face. For the first time, she truly understood what I wanted to teach. And that was worth more than any money. The daughter I always knew you could become. Later that night, as I was washing the dishes, I felt something change within me. For so many years, I had felt like a failure as a mother. I had invested so much time, patience, and dedication only to see my daughter, who once saw me as someone outdated and worthless. But now I saw a young woman finally becoming independent. Bruno entered the kitchen, leaning against the counter. Mom, she said softly. I never told you why I was so angry with you. I turned off the faucet and looked at her. Why? She took a deep breath. I was never really angry with you. I was angry with myself. I always felt like I should do something great with my life, that I should be successful. But when I failed, it was easier to blame you than admit that the problem was me. I understand you, Susan. She hesitated and continued. I don't blame you anymore. I was wrong, Mom, about everything. I hope you can forgive me. I exhaled, drying my hands. Then, without saying anything, I pulled her into a hug. This time, she didn't pull away. She hugged me tightly. I forgave you a long time ago, I whispered. I just needed you to see it for yourself. A month later, Susan found her first full-time job. It wasn't the dream position, nothing glamorous, but it was hers. The day she signed the contract, she came to me. She hugged me before she left. Thank you, Mom, she said, her eyes watery. For everything. I swallowed. I'm proud of you, Susan. She smiled. And when she walked out the door, it wasn't out of anger, nor resentment. It was by choice. It was at that moment that I realized something. True revenge is not about hurting, but about allowing the person to see their own mistakes and grow from them.